Okay, this is a 3AC head. Our goal here is to replace the valve stem seals while the head is still on the block. See here the valve stem seal, and you can see the valve right next to it there. And the whole purpose of what I'm going to do here is show you how to do it while it's still in the car. We have to have some way to keep the valve from dropping out of here down into the cylinder, and once it falls out into the cylinder, we're kind of in a jam. We want to keep the valve all the way up against the seat, just like this one is. And the way we're going to do that, switch over to the block, is while the head is on the engine, we're going to stuff rope through the spark plug hole into the cylinder on top of the piston. And we'll get this cavity filled with rope, and then we'll rotate the crankshaft so the piston comes up tight against the valves. That will pinch the valves up to the head so they can't fall out. As long as we don't rotate that crankshaft, the valves will stay put, and we can remove the spring and the little clips in here. Pull this off, snap the valve stem seal off, and replace it with a new one, and then put it back together. Pull the rope out, and we're good to go. Alright, to get that valve cover off, we need to remove this. So you take this off, two 10 millimeters here, disconnect this, and then when you lift this off, you pull this off here, and underneath there's a vacuum hose. You have to reach underneath and disconnect that, and just pull it off. So get this off first. The second thing you have to do is disconnect the throttle cable and switch to a different car. Okay, we're on a different car. When you remove the throttle cable, hold this one tight and loosen that one. And loosen this one up, but don't turn this one, because you want to get it back in the same spot when you put it back on. That way your cable is at the right tension. If you get the cable too tight, you'll have trouble getting your idle down. You have to pull this off. Either disconnect the hose from the PCV valve or pull the PCV valve itself. Now, there's a possibility if you try to pull this hose off, it'll crack because they're pretty old. And when you pull the PCV out, you could crack the seal here. And the seals you can get at O'Reilly's, Advanced Auto, they're really cheap. Okay, once that's off, I usually disconnect this cable, but you could just push it back and tie it off. If you disconnect it, make sure you have your heater cable or heater switch inside pushed all the way to the passenger side. That's heat on, and then this would be pushed this way as far as it would go when you hook it back up. That way you get your maximum heat. Then you remove these 12 millimeter and these 10 millimeter. I usually disconnect this wire and the wire to the temperature and kind of push this wire out of the way. And then you take these things off. These washers sometimes are kind of hard to get off. I usually grip them with a pair of pliers and twist them as I take them off. And once you get the valve cover off, then you can start working on the removing the rocker assembly. Okay, we have the valve cover off. You got the rocker. You'll need a deep 10 millimeter socket, 10 millimeter deep, 10 millimeter deep, and then there's 10 millimeter down here, and here, right there. And we're going to pull this whole rocker assembly off, and when you grab it by each end and lift it straight up. You might have to take a screwdriver and slip it underneath and pop it free, maybe in one of these spots, but chances are it'll come right off. And try to keep it all together. Don't let it the ends fall on the ground. Also, there's a lot of oil sitting in here, so what I do is take a clear siphoning hose, well, just a clear hose like this one, and I suck the oil up into the tube, maybe, I don't know, 6 or 8 inches, and then blow the oil out into a container. That's the only easy way I know of getting the oil out, because it will get in our way when we're putting things together around the seal. So I don't know, that's an option. Okay, now we're going to remove the rocker. I'm going to loosen up all these 10mm. This is the deep socket it'll take, and what I usually do is I maybe start with this one, just crack it just a little bit, then crack that a little bit, and that one a little bit, that one a little bit, and then the middle one a little bit, and then go back and do it again and include these somewhere in the process. Try to loosen them all up in that order, like in 3 passes. Or another thing you can do is you can loosen all of the valves up by backing off this 10mm nut and screwing out the screw. Takes the pressure off all the valves. I usually don't do that. I just loosen all these, and then if you leave these in, especially the 2 on the end, you can leave them all in. If you leave the 2 on the end, then when you pick it up, you grab each end and it won't fall apart on you. You can set it on a workbench somewhere, out of sight, out of mind, until you get ready to put it back in. This is what the rocker assembly looks like after it's removed from the car. See, I left the bolts on the end, these long ones, that way these won't pop off. Easier to put it back on the car. Okay, I disconnected the number 1 spark plug wire. I'm going to pull the plug. This is my favorite way of doing it, with a 6-inch extension on a 3/8 drive ratchet. Now we're going to have to rotate the crankshaft in order to get the piston where we want it. What I like to use is a narrow top 3/8 drive with a short 19mm. That way you can get it in there onto that nut without hitting your radiator. And we want to rotate the piston around. You can kind of watch the valves. This valve is up, or the rocker, I mean not the rocker, but the cam lobe is up, and this one's pointing over here. But when they're both pointing down, then that means the piston is at the top. We want the piston to be down near the bottom of the stroke, so we can stuff rope in there, or at least halfway down. So when it's at the top of the stroke with both lobes down, you put a screwdriver in there, and you can feel the top of the piston. It should be right at the top. So I want to rotate the crankshaft so the piston drops down at least a couple of inches. Then we can stuff the rope inside that hole, and then bring the piston back up against the rope, which will push against these 2 valves, keep them locked into place. I have a piece of house wire, number 12, it's copper. I've been using it to put it in the spark plug hole, so I can feel the top of the piston, whether it's going up or down when I rotate the crankshaft. Right now I want it to be down, so follow it down. You know, it's starting to come back up. Follow it down. Make sure I got it at the bottom. You know, stuff the rope in there and pull her up to the top. Okay, with the piston down at the bottom of the stroke, I stuffed about 30 inches of, I think it's about 5/16 diameter or 1/4 inch rope, probably 1/4 inch. I had to use a pointed object. There's a screwdriver with a, actually it's an oyster knife, but made from a screwdriver. But anyway, I used it to push the rope in, and then after I got 30 inches in there or so, I rotated the crankshaft until I couldn't turn it anymore. It's right up against those, holding that thing solid. And now I can get a valve spring compressor and get these two valves off. This is an inexpensive valve spring compressor. You can get them for less than $20 at Amazon. They work pretty good. You have to get the ends as low on the spring as you can. Okay, here you can see it installed on the spring. You turn the handle until the spring is compressed and loose. And then there's two little clips inside there. I don't know if you can see those. They're split into two halves, and you have to get those free. Usually a magnet on a stick is a good way to go, so you don't lose them. And then the spring will come off. Here's another way to get the springs off if you don't want to use this. You get a socket that'll fit pretty close to the diameter of that thing, and take some magnets, stuff them down inside the socket. I guess you could attach them to the outside too, but I usually stuff them down in there, and then set it on there and take a mallet and smack it. That knocks the spring down enough for these two little clips to get sucked in by the magnets. Works pretty good. It's just an option. Okay, I just did it. I don't know if you can see down in there the magnets and the two little clips. I just smacked it about 3 times. Sometimes those little clips get stuck around the valve stem and they won't come free immediately. See the little retainers in there, magnet. Here you can see I removed the valve stem. Get it off and just slip a screwdriver underneath it and gently pop it free. Maybe 2 screwdrivers, one on each side would be better. And there is the valve stem seal. This is a Felpro kit I'm going to replace the seals with. These are the kit for the valve stem seals, new ones.
It's a piece where the time
you just press them on over the, oh, here's a head here, an old one.
Coming up on your show,
I usually get a socket that'll fit over it, that clears the rubber, and just kind of push it on, lubricate it with some oil first too. And make sure you lubricate that, and then press it on. After you press them on, then you'll have to use this thing to compress the spring. Okay, I got the new stem seals on, ready to put the valves on. Number 2 cylinder. Get a little bit of oil on my finger and rub it in the new stem seal. Just kind of carefully work it on there. Pass the notch, push it on. I'm going to have a socket here that fits around, clears the rubber. Just kind of tap it, make sure it gets down there. And then when you put the spring on, make sure you pull the valve up. It might not be up all the way, but putting these little retainers back in And the springs can be kind of tricky, so be careful that they don't go flying somewhere if you screw up, or you don't want them to drop down the oil holes. There's no oil holes on this side, so you're pretty safe, but just make sure the springs are up. The valve stem seals will hold the valve up, as long as you don't bump it when you're putting the spring back on. You're putting the spring back on, make sure you pull up on this as you're loosening it. I keep my fingers tight around these so that in case they pop out of the spring, I kind of squish them a little bit, but pull up. That keeps the retainer in the right spot. While you're backing it off, loosen up the pressure. Putting the rockers back on, I did not loosen all these up. Just clean the bases on them, put them in finger tight, tighten it up. I'm going to go start in the middle, then to this one, then this one, and this one, and this one. Just slowly work my way down, tightening them. I feel about the same amount of pressure. That one, for some reason that one's already tight. Loosen it back up a little bit. Yeah, they're almost down there. For some reason the back ones are tightening up first. Just trying to spread out the pressure so I don't put too much in one spot. I think I'm down. Now I can put in the 3 little ones here. Okay, I finished tightening down the rockers. I did not loosen up all of these. And I'm just going to start the car up and let it get warm. And then I'm going to go back and check these, make sure the gaps are correct for the hot, when the engine's hot. Tighten down the valve cover. Just start in the middle and work my way back and forth, trying to keep them equal. Now, after I start this engine and get warmed up and hot, then I'll go in and take the cover back off and reset the valves. The intakes to 0.008 inch and the exhaust to 0.012 inch. If you had to set them cold prior, before we put this on, if you were setting them cold engine would be 0.007 for the intake and 0.011 for the exhaust. And then after the engine is warmed up and hot, actually you can drive it 20 miles or something like that if you want, but you should do it fairly quickly. 0.008 on the intake and 0.012 on the exhaust valves. If you don't do that, you run the risk of burning a valve. If the gap is too tight, that's worse than being loose. Too tight means the valve's going to sit there on the valve seat just a little fraction of a time longer, and it's going to cause it to burn. And that makes a notch in the valve usually, and it'll start leaking, and eventually the valve can fall apart and drop in on your cylinder head and damage your piston and your cylinder head.